Okay, it's been a while. I've had a lot going on, but I finally managed to catch Robert Eggers' Nosferatu in theaters earlier, and I want to talk about it. So, I guess first things first, since it's one of the biggest things people are discussing, let's go ahead and get out of the way what I think about the film aesthetically. Um, as far as like the three big Nosferatu films go, the 1922 version, 1979 version, and then this one, I honestly can see arguments to put them in any order in terms of like how good do you think they are aesthetically. Personally, I think the 1979 film's probably my favorite, but I sort of have like two different lines of thought in regards to that. And one being that I feel like both the previous films, the 1922 and 1979 versions, have a stronger and more consistent like style throughout the film. And so where I think this new version differs and where it kind of becomes its own thing is I think it's more focused on being more period accurate and being a more modern adaptation, being able to show certain things in a much more visceral way. And I feel like that's sort of where this film's more focused. And that's not to say that there aren't really stylistic shots and there aren't really cool moments, but I feel like when you take still shots from each of these films, like a bunch of people have been doing, and try to compare them, just most still shots you're going to grab are going to just look more interesting from those previous two films. But again, in terms of like actually viewing it as a film and viewing things in motion, there are moments in this film that are able to be a lot more visceral and a lot more interesting in that way. But again, from a general aesthetic sense, I think I sort of prefer the 1979 version. I almost want to go back and watch each of these films again and sort of see if I actually truly feel that way. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's where I'm leaning. So again, not to say that this film looks bad. There are definitely, again, moments that do have a certain style to them that's really cool. And again, there are probably some still shots you could grab from this film that can definitely compete with those other two films. But I feel like if you're just grabbing a bunch of them, like say we took 10 shots from each film, those other two films are probably going to stand out a little bit more. But again, all that being said, this definitely, in terms of this sort of film, has some of the most visceral moments I've seen. So again, this is an adaptation that definitely takes advantage of some of the things it's able to do as a more modern film. Which, that being said, it's also interesting because it's weird that it is now at this point sort of fresh to see a more gothic horror film like this. I kind of hope we start to get more of them. I feel like Robert Eggers has directed two of the really big ones now, being The Witch and this one. And I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot coming out that are really that comparable. So hopefully we start to see more. Watching this, I was kind of thinking I would have been interested maybe for Robert Eggers to have possibly tackled a remake of Vampire. I feel like that kind of would have been more his style. It could have been maybe an interesting companion piece to The Witch because it's a vampire film more kind of in that style. But yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, I kind of, now that I'm thinking about it, really would like to see somebody remake this film at some point, whether it's Eggers or not. But I don't know. Guess we'll see if that ever happens. Again, that is actually one of the most interesting and stylistic vampire films to me. So again, I would love to see a remake of that eventually. But back to the movie we're actually talking about. So yeah, aesthetically, I don't think it's necessarily my favorite, but I also don't think I'm really going to sit and argue with you if you tell me it is yours. So again, it stands out in certain ways that I think are better than those previous two films, and then it stands out in other ways that I think are not quite as good. In terms of its aesthetics. In terms of everything else, it's got an incredible cast. Some of the actors I really didn't even realize were in this movie. So, incredible cast. Willem Dafoe gives a really good performance in this. Not that he doesn't always give a good performance, but I feel like this is one of my favorite performances I've seen of him in the last couple years. Maybe just one of my favorite performances I've seen from him in general, to be honest. He really fits the role he's playing here. And honestly, I feel like this is definitely one of the, like, films that really would compete for best ensemble in my head. These types of films really don't really normally get awards recognition, so I don't really see it even really competing for that. But I mean, the two films really well, actually, I guess there's three off the top of my head if I was trying to think of what film I might give best ensemble, which would be this one, Honora, and Saturday Night. I think it definitely competes with those two in terms of like the sheer, like just how great its casting is as a whole. Lily Rose Depp obviously gives a great performance and everybody's talking about it. I believe it's her first big role, maybe not, but regardless, it's definitely one of her first big roles, if not her first. And yeah, I think the version of Count Orlok we get in this is probably my favorite of the films. In terms of the film's aesthetic, I think he's my favorite because of the way he looks in this film. Like, it's just the most interesting to me. But also, I like how this film has him interact a lot more with characters in the film. So, like, I feel like you just get a more interesting version of him here. I feel like story-wise, this feels a little more fleshed out than those other two films, which shouldn't necessarily be that hard, given that it is the longest of the three films, I'm pretty sure. And also, it's just able to convey a lot more things more easily when it is a film with sound compared to the 1922 version being a silent film. But yeah, so story-wise, I think this one's the strongest. Cast-wise, I think this one's probably even the strongest. I think my favorite actor in one of these films and like my favorite role in one of these films is definitely Isabel. I forget how to say her name. I'm honestly I've never even heard it said, but y'all know who I'm talking about. The girl who also is in Possession. I think she's my favorite person in any of these films, but again, in terms of the overall cast, I think this one probably takes the cake there too. And then sound-wise, I feel like this film is more interesting, which, again, one of the films it competes with is a silent film. So that's not really saying a whole lot, but there just is a lot going on in this film in terms of its sound design. I did also watch it in Dolby Cinema, so I don't know that I'll feel quite the same about it when watching it in another format. I guess we will see eventually, but yeah. And that's not to say I haven't listened to tons of different scores for the 1922 version, so like maybe there's some score out there that just completely elevates the film, but again, it's a lot about like just the different sounds that are present in this film, not really necessarily like a backing score for the sound design of this film. So yeah, I guess that's most of what I want to say. Like I said, I kind of hope we start to get some more gothic horror. I feel like vampire films, especially the gothic ones, are a little more interesting to me. You can definitely do some good modern vampire films. Let the Right One In is one of my favorite movies, not just vampire movies, but again, in terms of modern vampire films, it's definitely one of the more interesting ones, and I feel like it even kind of leans a little bit more towards gothic sensibilities in a lot of the modern vampire films. So yeah, that is what I've got to say.